Welcome to Red Eye Story Hour for Tales Told After Midnight. I'm your host and author, R.J. Burley. And today we're reading Chapter 4 from Outcast, which is Book 1 in the Mountain Warriors series. Chapter 4. A few days later, I walked into the belly of the beast, just outside of Quantico, Virginia. Tommy worked in drone headquarters. The building was a gigantic former factory that once made some forgotten necessity. We sent those jobs overseas, and now our factories housed armies that spied on us. Based on the size of the buildings and the number of people employed, spying seemed to be our country's largest industry these days. The ride there was uneventful, other than the bus that was 30 extra minutes late than the usual 15 minutes. I cringed as the lumbering vehicle approached, because with the delay, it had picked up far more people than normal. Its suspension was compressed so low that it looked like one of those lowriders that were popular decades ago. I crammed into the front accordion door, almost overwhelmed by the physical press and stench of the crowd. Somehow the human smell was even stronger than the diesel exhaust that spewed from the overworked engine. I squeezed past the people pressed together in the stairwell and paid the disinterested driver, dropping the money in the box. The bus was so full I couldn't get beyond the driver or move back towards the stairwell like the others had done. The people all around me moved en masse like a wave from the bus's acceleration, and I was slammed and held against the windshield, pressed up against the driver as the bus slowly pulled away. I was partially bent over the steering wheel, was blocking more of the driver's view. The engine barely picked up speed as it ground in protest beneath the weight of the mass of humanity, and it attained a speed barely 10 miles an hour behind the flow of the light traffic. "Look away from the window and breathe," the driver scolded me a few times before I comprehended his thick accent. The smell of fermented garlic and cabbage seemed to amplify his angry tone. "Why?" I asked. "Can't see." He flung an angry hand in the direction of the foggy windshield and wiped it with a greasy rag. I unintentionally exhaled a pent-up breath and watched it fog the window he just wiped. I tried to brush the fog that I had just caused with my bare hand, but it just smeared the water and grime. The driver irritably slapped my hand. He rolled his eyes and sighed heavily, and this time I could distinctly smell ginger with a touch of onions from his mixed fermented meal. I looked out the driver's side window at the line of long-dead cars that rested on long deflated tires and poorly stood guard over abandoned buildings with shattered glass windows. Transient people wandered in and out of the maze of damage. Miles upon miles of wreckage, both structural and human. And we were supposed to be the lucky ones, I mused. I actually looked forward to infiltrating the Forbidden Zone. It couldn't be much worse. In a moment of black anger at what society had become, I reasoned that at least the zombies would eat the human debris. I regretted the anger and hypocrisy immediately. Currently, I wasn't any better than a hobo myself. The bus finally pulled in front of the Leviathan, where Tommy worked. I pushed my way off the bus and entered the old factory building, where I walked to the front desk in the cavernous lobby. After flashing my badge and ID to the security guard, who loved his minor position of power too much, I got a bit of the runaround. I finally tired of it. "Do you not recognize my last name?" I demanded. He just looked at me as if I were an idiot. "Look at the picture behind you," I said as I motioned at the smug visage on the portrait behind him. The guard didn't move. I explained. "The governor, Daniel Hildebrand, the man with nearly absolute power. That's my uncle. Pretty much my adopted father." The bastard still didn't move. He should have been scared, but I could see he didn't believe me. I was about to raise my voice when his phone rang. He answered it, turned red, and started sweating. I could tell that he was getting chewed out by someone. I could guess who that someone was. I gave the camera behind the desk the middle finger and started walking to Tommy's office. The security clown yelled at my back, "Eric Hildebrand, Senior Director Thomas Lawrence will see you now." But I was already long past him. "Thanks, idiot," I muttered, well out of his hearing range. I walked through a rat maze of hallways and rode the elevator up to another maze complex. The hall cameras swiveled and witnessed my journey. An oddly robotic yet sexy female voice from the speakers beneath the camera told me which way to turn when I needed. I obeyed. I arrived at my destination. As I raised my fist to knock on the sturdy oak door, it swung open. I expected him to do that. Tommy had a persistent mess-with-you sense of humor. He's not that funny, but it keeps himself entertained. And that's what ultimately counts if you're Tommy. Nonetheless, it still startled me. The situation, the building, my ambitions, my new sobriety, everything seemed to be weighing on my nerves. "Come in, brother," Tommy ordered. I complied. I walked past his attractive secretary, while Tommy glanced over me. I was dressed in the gaudy material that was by default fashionable due to it being the only choice. Tommy was dressed in a pre-apocalypse Armani that looked tailored and brand new. "Dang," he said, "you look like one of those refugees from the Forbidden Zone already. I should call security for that beard alone," he said with his usual laugh. "Come into my office. We need to talk. But that beard, dude." I ran my fingers through my week-long, unkempt facial hair as we entered his office and he closed the door. The air in the room compressed as it sealed shut. My beard was a healthy 5 o'clock shadow when we last saw each other in the bar. It was borderline acceptable to have a well-maintained 5 o'clock shadow. It was to be properly groomed to give the image that you didn't care. But mostly the current fashion was to be clean-shaven to give the air of superiority over those bearded ruffians in the Forbidden Zone. I had blasted past any of the fashionable grooming standards. Tommy walked to his desk and fidgeted with something. When he stepped away, I noticed a framed photograph that was turned upside down on his desk. However, his desk was cluttered with so much paperwork that it may have already been face down. It struck me as odd that despite his usual impeccable demeanor, his workspace was a complete mess. A large map of the world spread across a side wall like a quilt. It was modeled with striped zones that I figured marked the forbidden zones throughout the world. More than 3/4 of the landmass was off limits, as well as large swaths of the Pacific Ocean with many islands and whole countries in Europe and Africa, as well as the whole island continents of Australia and Antarctica. I swore as I muttered, "All of Antarctica is off limits? How did that happen?" Tommy ignored my words and said, "The beard." He released a comically overdone sigh. I wasn't sure if it was my lack of shaving due to laziness combined with the overriding sole focus on my self-imposed mission, or if at an atavistic level I wanted to be like the swordsman I had witnessed. I had barely slept a total of a few hours in the last few days that passed since seeing the action on the barroom TV. In that time, I had gathered all my resources, worked overtime washing dishes at a friend's restaurant, and borrowed heavily from more successful family and friends to acquire the latest survival, camping, and recording equipment. Any free time that I had left was spent looking over info about the Forbidden Zone. I was so ensconced in the study of the place that I was mentally on edge, like I was surviving there already. Most of what I studied was bootleg topographical maps for backpackers before it all went down, and other hard-to-come-by info. The current government definitely did not want people to feel comfortable enough to attempt an infiltration into the Forbidden Zone. Another reason for throwing myself with an abandon into this quest was that I really wanted to succeed. I wanted to impress upon Jennifer how badly I wanted to change her situation. She needed some space for a few weeks to sort things out, and that would be when I came out of the forbidden zone. She had accused me of being directionless, career-wise, and she was right. I had lazily become a loser. No direction, no real prospects, and unemployed. But I was sure that if I could get some really good video, interviews, and stories from the Forbidden Zone and publish them anonymously through some of the channels that Tommy had connections with, I could be a rich man in just a couple weeks. Everything in my life was riding on this venture. After getting over the self-consciousness with the beard, I looked around the office. Just about everything except the hard mahogany desktop seemed to be covered in a plush, maroon-colored leather. It fit his personality. Another hint at his success was that his desk was covered with paperwork, with great swaths of forest land cordoned off, limiting access to wood that made paper. Most paperwork was strictly done on the computer, but top-secret information tended to be kept on paper because any computer could be hacked. Tommy sobered and said, "You really are serious about this?" I didn't acknowledge with either nod or word, but he smiled when he saw the determination in my eyes as I simply stared back at him. Tommy continued, "By the way, I don't think you're that crazy anymore. I think the potential profits far exceed the risks." "Of course they're worth the risk to you, because I'll be the one in danger," I said with a wry smile. He raised his hands. "Hey, listen," he started to say. "Relax, brother," I said. "I'm joking around. I would do this whether you helped or not. I need to chart my own destiny. I thank you for your help. By the way, what are those vampire things that I've seen on those videos?" I had already asked, but I wanted to see if he changed the story. He shrugged them off. "Who knows? Wannabes? Members of a doomsday cult? Maybe a mutant variation of the zombie virus changed them into that. Or their immune system reacts to the virus differently. There is a bunch of weird stuff going on. That's why it's quarantined and why you should stay away," he ended with a laugh. I started to laugh when I noticed a medical file on his desk among the books, charts, and files. The medical chart had my name on it and a checkout date from 2 weeks before we even discussed me going in. I pointed that out and asked about it. He hesitated and said, "They must have accidentally placed the wrong date on it. I never even reviewed your record until 2 days ago." I picked it up and looked through it. He rounded the desk in a hurry and tried to take it from me. I held him off and saw something about a blood test that had been drawn after the zombie outbreak quarantined the Southeast 2 years ago. They wrote something about the Hildebrand bloodline and DNA. I couldn't understand all the jargon from just a quick glance, but it said something about how it related to potential immunity from the zombie pathogen and something about vampires. "That's top secret," said Tommy. "It's about my blood, so it's actually mine," I protested, as I placed the folder in my backpack for later reading. I then stared at him, letting him know that I was keeping it. "Fine, read it later. I don't care. By the way, would you like a drink?" I zipped up my backpack and said, "Thanks, but no. I haven't touched anything since that last outing we had." "I've got Jameson's Irish whiskey," he said with a tempting smile as he rocked 2 drinking glasses side to side after he placed the bottle on the table. My eyes widened. That was my drink of choice, and I had not been able to get it in the last 2 years. But I said, "No, I can't." He cajoled me, but I stood firm. I gave one more refusal, and he cracked open the fresh bottle and poured 2 drinks. "You can't leave me to drink alone." That was my undoing. And as usual, one drink led to another. He knew me like Jimi Hendrix knew his guitar. "Let's get back to our plans," Tommy said with a toast. The hardest thing was to acquisition the thousands of dollars for gasoline for the trip to North Carolina. but I can get work to pay for that, thanks to your uncle." I whistled. Gas was no longer at gas stations, but at heavily guarded depots. I knew that fuel was scarce, but I had no idea it was that expensive. "You get more benefits from my uncle than I do," I complained. "But that's cool about the gas," I said as I toasted him. I then looked out his window and studied the miles of blight that had once been a beautiful city. The whiskey was hitting my head, and my mind wandered from his words. Alcohol was definitely my undoing. I dwelled on how bad the times were these days. It was hard to believe that not long ago a trip that far was nothing, maybe $30 in gas. "Check this out." Tommy held up a baseball cap as well as a vest and a waist belt. It had pockets for camera equipment, notepad, and other stuff a journalist would need. In short, it looked like something a journalist would have worn in the jungles of Vietnam. Now it looked like something an amateur would wear to try to look like a journalist. I was sure there was more to it than what I saw, so I said, "It looks like something a dork would wear." I was expecting Tommy to say something smart-assed. Instead, he tapped his finger to 4 different points: the bill of the ball cap, both shoulders, and the belt. "You can't see them, but those are cameras." "Like a body cam?" I asked. "Better," he exclaimed. "They hook up to a computer and match the footage so it looks like one coherent image, no matter which lens takes the picture. The computer's program generates fill-ins in the gaps due to arm movement and other obstructions. It also makes up for erratic movement so the viewers don't get motion sickness. Its image is both sharp and reliable as long as at least one camera is exposed. It's waterproof and has solar panels for charging as well." All I could do was mutter, "Cool." "It also comes with this," he said as he held a closed fist up near my face. His fingers sprang apart like a flower blossoming at fast speed. A little insect-like object flew from his palm. It buzzed around me with no more noise than a mosquito, and then zoomed to a pocket in the camera vest when Tommy commanded it, "Go home." "What was that?" I asked. Tommy smiled proudly and exclaimed, "A mini drone. It fills in the missing gaps from other cameras. It also flies back to that pocket when its battery is almost used up, and it charges itself in the pocket." "Whoa," I said, genuinely impressed. "That's perfect. How much did it cost you?" "Nothing. I snagged it from work. They're going to start issuing it to perimeter guards that work under us, but not for another year, after we make our fortune from the show that you film." "Speaking of border guards," I said worriedly. Reading my mind, he interrupted and said, "I will have no problem redirecting the drones. You'll have an easy, undetected way in and out." "Cool." He smiled and rubbed his hands together as he said, "But here's the best news. We leave tomorrow." "What? Why?" I was a bit shocked and worried. As much as I had studied the situation and longed for it, up until now it had all been in theory. I could always back out, but this needed an immediate response. "Why so soon?" I asked. Tommy explained matter-of-factly. I told him that I wanted to inspect along the outside of the fence, and that it was important to see the terrain and walk it to get a feel of how the drones fly. I'm expected there tomorrow afternoon. Even I have to follow official timelines. I felt an almost literal weight on my shoulders. Every single hole in the fabric of my plans suddenly stood clear in my face like a mental confrontation. I needed more planning. "I can't go now," I blurted. He smirked as he said, "I knew this was all talk. You never follow through anything." He knew which buttons to press. "Get bent," I growled. "That's the spirit," he said. "Let's have one more shot of whiskey to celebrate." I stared at the glasses and thought for a quick moment. Tommy was right. The sooner the better. "Sure, let's have a drink to this endeavor, my friend." He nodded as he poured the drinks.